We wanted to talk about the life of Joseph in the context of the law of buy-in, because Joseph's life really demonstrated a lot of leadership. When we look back at Joseph, we see a lot of leadership characteristics, but we also see a lot of vision, and we see a life of adversity. So what we wanted to go through in our presentation was just how different aspects of his life led him to the point where, as we see him in retrospect, we see him as a leader, because it was not an easy life. So just to reflect, the chapter was about people buy first into the leader and then into the vision. And so Joseph was a dreamer, and he had visions of leadership, but he had vision without maturity, and his leadership didn't come naturally. And so at the very end, we're going to also conclude with just the lessons that we learned from his life.
Okay, it was from the book of Genesis, beginning in chapter 37. We learned that Joseph, at age 17, he was the youngest son of Jacob. And Jacob loved Joseph more than he did his other sons. And Jacob made him a fancy robe. He had such arrogance and entitlement because of all of these innocent, this love from his father. But his brothers were very jealous of him, and he would tell them of his dreams. And his father had a feeling that his dreams were more than just dreams that a young boy would have. But his brothers, because they were about his arrogance and his being over them, they hated him, and they felt that and Joseph had no idea that he was absolutely clueless, and that he was without any humility about this. And when Jacob sent Joseph to tend the sheep with his brothers, he obeyed them without understanding that his brothers really had bad feelings about him. But his brothers conspired to get rid of him, and they stripped him of his fancy coat. They threw him into a cistern, and then later thought better of that, sold him to the Ishmaelites, who took him into Egypt. And he was certainly shocked by all of this. He had only known his father's love and his pampering ways. So now, with the shock of failure in his relationships with his brothers and the lack of abilities to communicate with them, he had to rely on God and become strong on his own, knowing the Lord was his only ally. And he was sold into Egypt, again in Egypt, to the captain of the guard to the Pharaoh. He lived in his house, but was actually sent to prison. So he spent a lot of time in adversity and having to rely on God. And eventually, he actually was able to interpret dreams with the help of God. He understood that it wasn't he, it was actually God that was helping him.
And picking up where she's leaving off that, we see how Joseph, he went and with the challenges that were before him, the adversities that were presented, he trusted God, and he went with the vision of, and the leadership developed through the adversities and the challenges. They didn't put him back in like the Kroc brothers, the McDonald brothers, Ray Kroc. He had side steps, but he grew from them and moved forward at each point. And so, what the main thing that I had gotten out of the lesson was that the scripture in Genesis 45, when Joseph makes himself known, and he had a little bit of a bitterness to his brothers for what they did to him, but he used his leadership at the right time to present what that he was known as the position he had attained through all the adversities, and what his brothers had initially put him through. He didn't have any bitterness towards him, but he still used his leadership at the right time to reveal himself. And I want to read the scripture that says what Joseph did in 45. It's in verse 7. It says, "But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant of earth and to save your lives for a great deliverance." And through that, we can see that Joseph trusted God, but he was, his leadership, he allowed God to guide him, and that he used those adversities to grow and become the leadership that he wanted.
What are the stories that each one of us loves? The stories that we love are about imperfect people that are able to do extraordinary things. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah.
Well, what's interesting about Joseph is that he had, just going full circle on the vision, I mean, this is a guy that had gone through every single situation, and you're thinking, man, the chips are down. He's not going to overcome being sold into slavery. He's not going to overcome being thrown into jail. He's not going to overcome even rising up in each one of these situations. And he did something that was extraordinary. When God called him to lead his people, he was able to use his influence as a man and actually lead Israel powerfully for God. And I think also what's remarkable about that to me as a spiritual man is that he was able to rely on God through that process. It wasn't him just puffing himself up. It wasn't some flashy plan. But he actually did rely on God, and he had strong men in his life throughout that process. You know, he was close to his dad. Eventually, he was close to Potiphar, rising up to be the number one person in his home. Number 3, he was close to the jailer. Of course, he's going to win the respect, the trust, and the honor of leading God's people powerfully when it comes time to lead Israel. He became a leader, and his leadership actually saved Israel.
So in conclusion, as we look at the principle that's demonstrated here, Joseph wanted to be a natural leader. He started off wanting to be. He had a vision, but it was a vision that was based on arrogance, on some entitlement, and that just didn't go very well. So going through, just as in the book, Gandhi was respected because he had demonstrated leadership and he had won over the people before he gave them the vision. And Joseph was able to take and through the adversity, gain the influence that led to the powerful leadership that Israel needed at the time.
Great.
Do we take questions?
You lead a discussion for 2 minutes.
Where are you guys going? So, do we have any questions?
Why did you choose Joseph?
We chose Joseph. Actually, there were a lot of different choices in the Bible to pick from, but in Joseph's life, I think in particular, he was a guy who, again, he didn't succeed as a leader initially, and the whole point of this chapter is that leadership, people follow the leader first before they follow the vision, and Joseph had that vision